who is Ken? For people that don't know Ken, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I think I'm probably like everyone else, actually. I got into college with a wrestling scholarship, probably the first time I was around business people, and realized, I'm probably not going to make it after collegiate wrestling. There's not really much more, so got to figure some stuff out. And I ended up taking a job while I was finishing college because I couldn't pay my rent, and in an apartment business, and I was an on-site manager, collecting rent, fixing stuff. I grew up, my dad was a contractor and my mom was a hairdresser. So I grew up with hardworking parents. And so I knew how to do everything, literally plumbing, electrical, paint, clean, whatever. I just did whatever. And the owner came over one day and he's like, thanks, man. Because I was like, this place is vacant. Like, people aren't paying. Like, it's pretty common sense, really, for me. I go, I just need good people in here. And then he came over after I cleaned it all up. And he's like, thanks. And all of a sudden I saw the revenue go. And I was like, dang, I'm on the wrong side of the desk here for sure. And then that was when I decided I'm going to get my real estate license and kind of figure out this space. But it was completely lucky. And I did it literally. I was in a survival mode.
Yeah. Wow. And then what happens next?
Well, then of course, I ended up hooking my train to now a legend up in the Seattle area, a guy by the name of John Goodman that bought a lot of properties and grew a huge company. At the time it was called Goodman, then it went to Pinnacle, and then it got bought by Colliers, I think. And I don't know exactly how many units they had when they sold, but I know it was close to 100,000 or something. And John was my original mentor, and I started managing properties all up and down the Western U.S. And that's when I really learned. I started to learn the difference between good and bad purchases, good and bad management, good and bad markets, and all that kind of stuff. Because an owner of any real estate, they don't always know those things, and they buy anyway, right? Yeah. As we know. So then they turn it over to a guy like me, a property manager, and you either improve it or you don't. And if you don't, you get fired. So you really get creative as a property manager. So for the first 8 or 9 years, that's all I did was manage. I managed somewhere around 20,000 apartments, and in that period of time, just really, really busy. And then one day I was like, I need to own these. And that's when I stepped on the other side, but I didn't know how. And I didn't know how to raise money. I didn't know how to negotiate debt. I did, however, know when to spot a good deal. Yeah. Because I had gotten enough of those in the property management world where I was like, I knew, oftentimes just rich people would bring assets to me. Yeah. I was in the fee management business, and I would go, dude, why did you buy this? I can't believe you paid this price. And you must not have looked at anything. And then sometimes you'd have a partnership or a group that would come. It would be a really, really good deal. I'm like, dang, this is a good deal. So it was so I learned, right, from all these different partnerships, all these different groups, on what to buy, where to buy, why to buy, if there's a story, no story. And then, of course, as a property manager, you have to squeeze out every nickel. Yeah. So that's where I learned how to really do value add. And so I felt really comfortable on being able to identify something and turn it into something. I knew I could do that. But I didn't know how. So that was the next piece. Started with 1, then it was 2, then it was 3. That was, next thing you know, I got to 1,000 units, and then I didn't know how to grow a business, and then I had to figure that out. And then I got to 4,000 units, and I didn't know how to grow a business. So and then all of a sudden I was like, okay, now I got to hire a CEO, CIO, CFO, COO. I didn't know how to do that, so then I had to figure all that out. So every single ladder rung it seemed so far ahead, right? But now, I guess 30 years later, here we are.
Wow. Incredible story.
Let's talk about that first deal. I mean, that's an incredible transition. You got to do all the reps managing, which I think you kind of reverse engineered your career, right? By being in the trenches and then feeling it, seeing it, knowing all the know-how. Talked about the first deal. How did you stabilize it? Where'd you get the capital? What was that like?
So I bought some small stuff, right? With my own cash, ran out of cash. And I learned that, just from doing small things, that I was in the single family space initially, right? Condos, houses and stuff, and, you know, putting tenants in there. I felt very comfortable with that. And of course I was using my own money as we do. And then I was still managing properties. And this guy out of New York, and his name was Leonard Litwin, and they called him New York Lenny. He sent his grandson out to Phoenix to build this 182 unit building. And they had all kinds of problems with it, right? Just, again, it's just an out-of-state owner, out-of-state developer building stuff. So they hired me to lease it up, fix it up, all that kind of stuff. And Mr. Litwin called one day, and you know, I was always repairing and fixing and, you know, and doing whatever he could to kind of grow the NOI and all that kind of stuff.